Doru, do you have the slides?
I'd rather share my.
You muted.
Yeah, I'd rather share my text. So I don't know if this helps in any way.
Yeah, we can see that. That's right.
Okay, so I'm ready.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll just give a couple of seconds for people to, and I'll try and change the camera so you can actually see our faces rather than. Does Doru want us to be able to read this paper along with him? You see the wrong thing. Oh, I'm presuming. Yes. Do you want us to read it with him? We've got the text in front of us. That's what you want, Doru?
Yes, that's the idea.
Okay, I think we're all here. So, welcome, the Very Reverend Dr. Doru Costache, presenting on communicating theologically interpreted scientific information to Christian congregations, patristic and neopatristic lessons. Thank you very much.
And thank you. And I apologize for not being able to be there. I convened this stream, Faith and Science, for ANZATS since, 3 years now, together with Nicola Hogarth-Cregan, on behalf of the two organizations we represent, EastCast in Australia and New Zealand Christians in Science, the major organizations specializing in faith and science in the Antipodes. But that's that. Anyway, let's roll the ball. In the last 70 years or so, at least from the publication in 1966 of Ian Barber's Issues in Science and Religion, the field of faith and science, also known as Science and Religion or Theology and Science, made significant strides towards dismantling the conflict narrative. This conflict has pre-modern historical roots, but became an ongoing reality with the culture wars of the early modern era, especially occasioned by the rise of geology and biology in the 18th and the 19th century, respectively. The fires of conflict were fueled again and again by the progress of the sciences, which many Christians could not welcome because of misunderstanding Scripture as a scientific textbook that told them everything they needed to know about the world. And since the sciences unveiled phenomena that entailed nature's autonomy, Christians considered any scientific discovery an attempt at undermining their sense of God's sovereignty as creator. But it is not my intention to discuss the shaky theological foundations of Christian fundamentalist worldviews. What matters here is that this counterproductive attitude, doubled by the equally fundamentalist responses of the atheist ideologists of science, are what made the conflict narrative a dominant of Western culture to this day. Through historical scholarship, through Peter Harrison and others, down to the recent input of Nicholas Spencer and James Unguranu, prove that the conflict stance is not the only kind of interaction between theology and science. After all, Barber himself identified 4 ways of interacting. But the fact is that at the grassroots of obtuse Christians and atheist propagandists alike, everything looks like a zero-sum game. Against this backdrop, researchers of science and religion from Andrew Briggs and John Handley Brooke to Tom McLeish and John Polkinghorne, and so many others, have painted a much more complex picture of the situation. From the vantage point of their contributions, the conflict narrative represents but a fraction of the spectrum of ideas out there. At least, this is the majority view in the academic discipline of science and religion, which has been operating in diverse settings, from historical to philosophical to religious studies. This discipline currently flourishes in Western Europe and North America, but not down under. Definitely not among the very few theologians who dare to work across various disciplines. The fact that, for example, this year, the faith and science streams of ANZATS includes only 5 papers is telling. In this paper, I will not discuss the causes of the academic marginalization of science and religion in our region. Suffice it to say that ideological factors and an outdated sense of disciplinary boundaries play an important role to that end. Instead, I'm interested in the limited impact of this discipline on a popular level, community level, connection and community. Anecdotal evidence shows that many Australian Christians believe that faith and science are irreconcilable, or, at best, that they have nothing to tell each other, and that, furthermore, the sciences are of no use to believers. ISCAST's recent survey in several Christian Victorian schools, to which 590 students responded anonymously, leaves no doubt about the level of misinformation at the grassroots. 70 years of doing science and religion could not sway the people at the pulpit and in the pews, including the younger generations. Well, theologians are included here, isn't it? Not even new approaches such as Peter Harrison and Paul Tyson's After Science and Religion, and Joanna Leidenhag and John Perry's Science-Engaged Theology are expected to make a dent. Undoubtedly, these approaches bring with them something new and important, but they operate within the same parameters of science and religion as an academic discipline. As such, and in the terms of our conference, we cannot expect them to foster connection and community. This being the case, at least from my viewpoint, herein I turn to a traditionally anchored approach, hermeneutical in scope, that proved to be efficient in communicating theologically interpreted scientific information to Christian communities beyond academic purposes. In terms of the method, this approach resembles science-engaged theology. That said, its historical roots go deep, to the New Testament authors and other early Christian theologians. Importantly, this approach does not require expertise from either proponents or the audience, constituting a flexible framework that can be deployed pastorally as well as academically. To clarify the workings of this method, I would describe its recent iteration, science-engaged theology, as tackling scientific information interpretively. As I say it here, the sciences are neither challenged nor confirmed by theological statements. Instead, scientific information is taken as a given and duly incorporated into the architecture of the theological discourse. For example, a contemporary science-engaged theologian will not discuss Christian anthropology in the supernaturalist fashion of creationism, with a lifeless statue plugged to the PowerPoint and become functional by divine agency, that's the human being, instead undertaking to present the mystery of humanity's creation in God's image against the backdrop of evolutionary biology. And so, dust of the earth, the biblical metaphor, captures metaphorically the entire history of life on earth. Here, evolutionary anthropology is taken for granted as a description of human nature, but reinterpreted in the light of a theological criterion, the fact of being made, or rather remade, in God's image. And when I say remade, I bear in mind perhaps not the majority view in early Christian scriptural interpretation, but nonetheless a significant one, where Genesis 2, for example, is not about creation or the creation of humankind. It's about our recreation into a spiritual kind of transfigured state that anticipates the eschaton. To give another example, The same or other science-engaged theologian will not discuss the foundations of Christian cosmology after the fashion of young earth creationism and the flat earth mythos, which focus on extraneous divine interventions that suspend the nature of a world made the other day, hocus pocus, just the way we see it, instead considering the billions of years counted by contemporary cosmology. In this case, again, evolutionary cosmology is taken as a given, but reinterpreted in the light of a theological criterion, namely, by bringing to the fore the ongoing interaction of divine and cosmic energies in the infrastructure of our evolving universe. This approach, I propose, helps believers to fly straight and level in regard to their faith, and to do so without getting worked up upon realizing the difference between the scientific description of reality and the worldview of scriptural authors. After all, as John Henry Newman pointed out long ago, the bearing of other branches of knowledge on theology, including upon the scriptural worldview, is undeniable. Accordingly, as the scriptural authors drew on ancient lore to communicate theological truths intelligibly to their readers, so must contemporary theologians connect their audiences to scriptural theology, including the doctrine of creation, but without the ancient cultural references available to the scriptural authors. Such references must be replaced, for the sake of intelligibility, pastorally, by contemporary references, including scientific ones. And this entails an interpretive engagement of contemporary science. What I am proposing concretely is that once we understood the lessons of the early Christian thinkers and learned how to replicate them within our cultural context, this pastorally grounded approach is suitable for popularizing the findings of science to believers, including the findings of science and religion as an academic discipline, helping to deepen their faith. I must now turn to examples of the application of this approach in early Christian sources. I begin with 3 scriptural examples where what would currently count as scientific information refers to ancient natural philosophy. Yes, I know my title says Patristic and Neopatristic, but within my tradition, there's no break, historically or otherwise, between scriptural wisdom and the patristic era, so to speak. So first, let's consider the single occurrence of the word logos in relation to Christ's identity as creator of the universe in John 1:1. Here, the word logos has the full weight it had in Philo of Alexandria's Middle Platonic cosmology. But scholars tell us, in the hands of John, the concept shows clear traits of reinterpretation. Significantly, John does not bother to discuss or to justify his terminological innovation. He deploys it as a known cultural trope for the purposes of reaching out to audiences that were aware of this concept, and does so in view of different theological assumptions pertaining to Christ's gospel. Second, related, in Colossians 1:15-18, Paul undertakes to map the invisible world after the Second Temple angelology, which has nothing to do with the cosmology of Genesis, of Job, or of the Psalms. Like John, Paul does not feel the need to explain this novelty and deploys it as a cultural reference familiar to his readers. Again, like John, he does so by reinterpreting Second Temple angelology in the light of Christ understood as principle of creation. Third, in Colossians 2:8, Paul refers to the fundamental elements, stihia, of the cosmos, the term stihia being borrowed from pre-Socratic cosmology. Paul does not attempt to legitimize the use of a known trope, and even though he deploys it in a negative sense, What matters is that he expects his readers to understand the reference, and he speaks their language. So the four elements aren't present in the Old Testament, to my knowledge, but he uses a term that was widespread in the Hellenistic era, including the early Roman era, and he uses it, he deploys it in order to convey something about the world, or our reference to the world, a way that was familiar to his readers. No wonder, given such examples, many early Christian authors followed suit, presenting Christian ideas by way of reinterpreted cultural, sometimes scientific references. I have been discussing this topic since many years, and the most articulate accounts of my understanding can be found in the 2021 monograph, Humankind and the Cosmos, Early Christian Representations, and two recent journal articles, Patristic and Neopatristic Antecedents of Scientifically Engaged Theology, published in 23, and The Cosmology of David Bohm, Scientific and Theological Significance, in 24. The latter being written in cooperation with Richard Reich from Macquarie University. Interested people might also look for my forthcoming book, A New Copernican Turn, Contemporary Cosmology, the Self and Orthodox Science Engaged Theology, written with Geraint Lewis from the University of Sydney, to be released just this month. To illustrate my above points, I shall give two more examples, one patristic, one neopatristics, which evidence continuity within the tradition of cultural contextualization of theological ideas through the engagement of the available knowledge, including scientific. Thus, Basil of Caesarea in the 4th century criticized the inconsistencies of Hellenistic natural philosophers, but he also took Ptolemaic cosmography as a cultural given and presented the doctrine of creation through the Alexandrian system of the world of concentric spheres. Awareness of the changing ideas of ancient scientists made him prudent about deciding on the number of celestial spheres. Accordingly, he mentioned 3 to 7 orbits. What matters is that he referred to Ptolemaic cosmography in order to render the theological discourse intelligible for his readers. Even when he criticized the natural philosophers openly, he did so on theological, not scientific grounds. Thus, he accused them of hypothesizing about nature and the universe in ignorance of God. This, in fact, was the source of their confusion. Basil's task, in turn, was to interpret the available information through the lens of theology, so much so that his cosmology and ontology are consistently God-centered. Typical of this interpretation is his take on the Genesis 1 commandment to the land to generate plant life, which he took as a divine energy that catalyzed the natural generative potential of the earth. In short, he took Ptolemy's spheres and the idea of the earth's natural generative potential as scientific givens, incorporating them into his theological discourse about reality. Many Christian authors, from Clement of Alexandria in the 2nd century to John of Damascus in the 7th, 8th, adopted the same stance. But let me turn briefly to a couple of modern neo-patristic examples. The 20th century neo-patristic movement proposed a critical and creative return to the methods of patristic or early Christian authors, whose cultural exploits, it was posited, can inspire us today. Accordingly, drawing on the likes of Athanasius of Alexandria and Maximus the Confessor, Dumitru Stăniloae, a Romanian theologian, reformulated the traditional doctrine of creation in conversation with contemporary chemistry, physics, and cosmology, producing a complex theological, indeed theocentric worldview, where relativity, the universe's expansion, and quantum physics feature as cultural givens. In turn, Panayotis Nelas, Greek theologian, developed theological anthropology in the framework of evolutionary biology. Referring to 9th century iconology, or theology of the icon, he discerned between the icon as a material object and as a religious item, showing that While the material object can be studied by the sciences, its assessment as a religious item falls in the purview of theology. Similarly, he continued, theological anthropology does not confuse human nature, whose analysis is the province of science, including evolutionary biology, and the fact of being in the image, which requires theological expertise. Obviously, while it establishes rigorous disciplinary boundaries, by comparing icon veneration and Christian anthropology, Nellis's approach lends itself to a pastoral deployment better than other methods. The same goes for the Neopatristic proposal more broadly, which can be replicated for various audiences, academic and popular alike. In so doing, in the footsteps of the scriptural and the patristic examples given above, it can effectively contribute to the interpretive integration of scientific and broader cultural information into the Christian discourse. As such, this approach might succeed where 70 years of academic study of science and religion could not, connecting the dots of faith and science and building vigorous communities of believers conversant with the contemporary cultural context. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. We're definitely on time, so we've got some questions. Please do.
So, Doru, this is Nishana here. So, are you saying, and I've misinterpreted you as the end of the second long day, that science will, for example, have its own analysis of the human person, and then theology will have its analysis of the human person, and one won't really have relevance to the other. They're just different dimensions of study. Is that right?
Yeah, they don't have to be reconciled.
Right.
They are so incommensurable, methodologically speaking, that we don't need to bother with even bridging them. Disciplines work according to their own parameters, their own methodologies, and it's impossible actually to bring, say, scientific information into theology or vice versa, other than by taking for granted the expertise of the other. But this, of course, requires a lot of humility on the part of all those involved in this kind of communication or dialogue, because we have to give due credit to the other party, and acknowledge the fact that the other party knows something about an aspect of reality that we from this side of the fence have no idea about.
So you're really advocating non-overlapping magisteriums?
Well, if you want to use cliches, yes.
Oh, we don't have to disagree, well,
So, what's your view then?
Well, I think that there are all sorts of questions come, for example, especially in biology, from the way that the professional biologists describe, for example, the human person or the evolutionary process. I'm thinking especially in the 20th century, which made it really incoherent to then have a theological perspective at all. And you really have a fideistic situation where you just sort of say, well, I believe anyway that, that human being is made in the image of God. I think the situation is a lot easier now because biology has changed. But what I'm saying is I really think that what biology says has enormous repercussions for what kind of theology can be done. And also that biology is just a part of how we actually observe the world and our experience of the world. And Scripture seems to suggest that we really should be able to read God from the natural world. And I don't think we can really just separate our experience of the natural world from our scientific observation of the natural world. I think they're connected to each other. We just happen to have a slightly different way of accessing the natural world than perhaps people did 300 years ago or 200 years ago. but it's all part of our experience, and that experience we should have confidence that that can lead us to God, even though it requires a lot of work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hear you. And you know from our previous conversations, I am a strong supporter of a way of integrating even scientific information in some kind of theological contemplation of reality.
Yeah.
But my point is, we have to understand that eventually theologically trained people cannot expect from scientists, regardless of what area of the sciences we're talking about, to give a hand. We cannot expect them to theologize. And I think it's dangerous to expect from a scientist who does his or her job to crack the door for theology. Some of them do that, more or less explicitly. For instance, in the book I mentioned, it's forthcoming from Routledge, written with an atheist cosmologist, Geraint Lewis. Yeah? We worked quite interestingly. It was a very interesting cooperation. He cracked the door a bit, saying something like, well, by all intents and purposes, we need a new physics. And we'll need to invent it or find it somewhere as soon as possible because the current models don't work. Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. And you can hypothesize as a philosopher or theologian as much as you like about what the contours of that new physics might be. But I still don't expect Geraint or anyone else from the zone of cosmology to give me a hand and say, well, this points to your God. So this is why I believe it's very important to respect the idea of incommensurable methodologies, to respect disciplinary boundaries, but also to integrate them into a model which I would call transdisciplinary, not transdisciplinary, where there's room for different perspectives coming from different disciplinary methodologies, all of which give a certain give us an idea of reality, reveal a certain aspect of reality that is completely inaccessible to others. If I may use an analogy, it's like when someone prepares the materials for a mosaic. You know, you have the tesserae, the small pieces of whatever colored glass, and first the artist colors those pieces of glass. You know, the tesserae, but the artist also has in mind the idea of what kind of image he or she wants to create. But then to assemble those tesserae, you know, still the artist should remember the fact that those tesserae have different colors, are of different forms, and so on and so forth. And those are the disciplinary building blocks of this mosaic of knowledge, if you like. That's how I see things.
And yet, people like Simon Conway Morris especially have opened the door. And explicitly, I would also say that Darwin himself had the door opening and shutting all most of his life. And he was definitely reflecting theologically in his work. And that's the nature of evolutionary biology, really. It's to either have the door open or to have the door shut. And, you know, it's been shut for a long time by the majority of scientists, but I think in the last few years, it's been an extraordinary opening. And, you know, we shouldn't ignore that. And
yeah.
I think it's very relevant.
I once again, I give you that. I do appreciate the fact that there are scientists who have embraced some kind of faith, you know. But the idea is that in order to reach a level of less excited interaction, we need to remember the fact that we have our jobs to do, But we also need the humility of acknowledging each other's expertise.
Well, it's a good night to finish. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
Thanks,
Doru.
everyone. Appreciate
Are you
questions.
better? Are you feeling better?
Yeah, well, look, my voice is still cracking, but what can you do? So it took me more than a month to put myself in this shape. But anyway, good to see you, and
Yes.
I hope you
Okay.
enjoy the conference. All the best, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Doru.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.